Thanks for joining us on Facebook. My name is Ted Goodman with the Daily Caller News Foundation, joined here with Danny Tarkanian, who has announced his intention to take on Nevada Republican Senator Dean Heller in the 2018 primary. Danny, thanks for joining us live in studio.
Thanks for having me on. You pronounced my name correctly. That's a good start.
Good. Great. And so, Danny, why are we challenging Dean Heller in a Republican primary?
Well, I was actually recruited by hundreds of people in Nevada. I was going to run for the CD3 race, which I lost by 1% in the last election, which was the closest race any Republican had in the state of Nevada. But I had so many people, particularly after Dean Heller's vote not to repeal Obamacare, that said, hey, somebody's got to step up, challenge Dean Heller. He's exactly the opposite of what we want back in Washington, D.C. We want somebody back there who supports the president and his America First policies. I stayed supportive of President Trump to the very end of the campaign, the only person in Southern Nevada, the only candidate in Southern Nevada to do so.
And can you kind of go through the political balancing act that we saw from Senator Heller this summer, and where, in your opinion, did he go wrong?
He has no true conviction on any policy positions, and we saw it firsthand and probably most magnified with the health care vote. He promises one thing when he's running for office. He knows he's running to a conservative base, so he pretends that he has conservative convictions. And then when he gets in office, he tries to appease certain groups of the identity politics the Democrats play so well. And so he tries to appease them. So with respect to the health care vote, he came out and said, I'm not going to, even though he voted for the repeal of Obamacare in 2015 when he knew President Obama would veto it, he voted against it in 2017 when he knew President Trump would sign it. And his reasoning was the worst. He said it didn't increase, he said it cut Medicaid spending, which is a complete lie, as anybody who understands the bill. Medicaid spending was going to increase $300 billion more than what it is today under the Senate provision. But Dean Heller said that was a cut, and that's, I guess, his math, and it wasn't enough, and people on Medicaid would be dropped off the roll. He doesn't understand the big problem with Obamacare is a skyrocketing cost, premiums, and co-pays for people who actually have to pay their insurance and don't get federal subsidies.
Sure. And so you've made this a centerpiece of your primary challenge, right? His actions on Obamacare. Is that true? Well, is that fair to say?
The whole premise of our campaign is Dean Heller has no true convictions. He won't stand up for what he believes in, and he bounces back and forth depending on which party he's speaking in front of. And everywhere I go in Nevada, when people tell me you need to run in this race against Dean Heller, they would tell me they're sick and tired of politicians who say one thing when they're running for office and then do the exact opposite once they're elected.
Okay, so let's talk about another issue that's come up here this week. Of course, the president yesterday signaled his plan with DACA. Of course, that's the deferred action for childhood arrivals, executive action that President Obama made. Where do you fall on that? Where do you fall on DACA and the president's actions yesterday to kind of punt it over to Congress?
Well, look, we're a country with rule of law. That's what makes us a civilized society. And the executive order by President Obama was a clear violation of the Constitution and an overstepping of his executive authority, usurping the congressional power. And President Obama stated as much before he signed the executive order. I think President Trump showed courage, because there's a lot of people trying to force him not to eliminate DACA, to doing the right thing and putting it back to Congress.
What's the right
Congress
thing?
To do. Well, Congress has to decide how they're going to handle the immigration issue. That's what the Constitution demands. It's very clear in there. It's not the president doing it through executive order. And again, this is another thing where Dean Heller's flip-flopped on. When he first ran for office, he was really strong against illegal immigration. Then once he got elected, he joined the Gang of Eight and wanted to give citizenship to all people here illegally. And certainly with DACA, he's come out very strongly for that. And I think, you know, again, that's the frustration with him.
Okay, great. So what do you say to critics who say, you know what, you're running to Senator Heller's right? So you're coming in from his right flank to take him on and hopefully defeat him in a primary where you have a lot of the activists voting, right? But in a general election, that would hurt the Republican candidate. In this case, that would, of course, be you if you're able to unseat Heller. What would you say to those
First
critics?
of all, there's two big mistakes with that. First of all, Dean Heller can't win a general election. He has lost the Republican base. They will not vote for him. They made it clear they won't vote for him. In fact, if you saw the Breitbart poll that just came out, he was in Republican primary voters only, he had a -14 approval rating. I mean, that's ridiculous. And he's not going to get them to vote from the general election. We saw that in the last election with Joe Heck when he ran for the U.S. Senate. For those that followed that race, Joe Heck was leading by 5% or more in every poll that came out. Then he had a press conference after the tape with Trump, and he said he was not going to support Trump again. He demanded Trump to step down from the nominee, and he dropped and never was leading the polls again. And that's what's going to happen to Dean Heller. And the second point is, you say I'm running to the right. I'm running to what I truly believe in and my true convictions. And I've talked about this from the time I first ran for office. I've never changed my positions. And I believe the vast majority of Americans feel the same way. It's just we don't have the correct message to people to say that. We're not getting, look at healthcare. The problem with healthcare isn't that we're not giving enough money in subsidies to people. The problem is the skyrocketing healthcare premiums, and we can go on. It's the messaging that if we do it right, the vast majority of Americans believe in it. I know the vast majority of Nevadans believe in it. If you look at what happened in the last race, Donald Trump lost Nevada by 2%, and he had everybody on the top of the ticket. He had the governor say he would never vote for him, Republican governor, Dean Heller, Republican senator, Joe Heck, Republican Senate candidate, and Crescent Hardy.
The question I was going to have for you. So this is true. Trump lost Nevada by
2 points.
2 percentage points.
Yeah.
And a number of the establishment Republican leaders in the state came out against him. So in your opinion, in your mind, do you think that anti-Trump mentality among some of the Republican leadership in Nevada led to his loss of the state? Was that margin small enough where, had they come out in support of the president, Trump could have won Nevada?
There's no doubt in my mind. It was 2 percentage points in a state that's 6% more Democrats. Trump resonates with a lot of the libertarian and blue-collar people in Nevada, and they came out and voted in groves with him. Look, I lost my race by 1%. It was the closest, I ran for Congress. It was the closest race any GOP candidate had in a contested race in Nevada. I know I lost my race because the top of the GOP would not support President Trump.
Okay, so this came down to affect you as well.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of these previous races. The Tarkanian name has been known in Nevada for decades, right? And you are your own man, and I don't want to introduce you as Coach Tarkanian's son, but of course your father, a legendary coach in the college basketball world, not just the state of Nevada, Jerry Tarkanian. But you have run yourself in a number of seats, right, at various levels over the past 15 years. Yeah. Why should Nevadans place their trust in you this time around, right? This is what, your 6th time running for public office?
But I ran in districts that were double-digit Democrats that nobody else would run in. I ran against an establishment, well-financed Republican in every one of the races, and I won 4 of those 5 primaries. And then I get to the general election, and I'm in a very difficult district, and I overperform, and we barely lose. The last race was a race that I really had a great opportunity to win. It was only a 2% more Democrat district. I lost by 1%. I had to beat the Senate Majority Leader in the state Senate, who outspent me 4-1. I beat him by 8% in the primary. Completely broke, battered with ads with the character assassination on me, and I still had the closest race of anybody GOP candidate in Nevada. Why wouldn't you think I would be the strongest candidate out there right now if I overperformed everybody else in that race?
Can we talk about the Republican governor out there? Of course, he may be part of the reason that we see Senator Heller kind of taking this interesting stand, and taking that interesting stand over the course of summer on health care. Do you see that being an issue for you in this primary?
Look, Governor Sandoval dictates to Senator Heller what to vote on and what to do. When they had that infamous press conference where they said they were not going to, Senator Heller said he was not going to support the Senate version of the repeal and replace of Obamacare. Yep. Governor Sandoval called that press conference and spoke first. Okay. He was pulling the strings. Governor Sandoval is not popular with the Republican primary base. In fact, most people would tell you that if he ran in a Republican primary right now, he'd have a very difficult time. He is very popular, though, with the independents and Democrats. In fact, more so with the Democrats, because he's passed a lot of things, including the largest tax increase in state's history, that the Democrats really like. That's not going to be in play in the primary.
And you know, can you talk to those of us outside the state of Nevada on what the voters are saying about the president this far into his presidency?
Well, it depends who you're talking to. You have to understand, like Nevada, I mean, like the rest of the country, Nevada is getting battered with negative stories about President Trump. I mean, fake stories that are completely false, like saying he didn't come out strong enough with his Charlottesville statement.
Did he come out strong enough with the Charlottesville?
He absolutely did. And
his initial response?
I was on MSNBC and CNN, and they questioned me on this, and I completely refuted it, and they had to get me off the show because they didn't have a response to it. Look, his first statement said he condemns these people that committed these acts that obviously were the white supremacist KKK and anybody else who was involved in those that protest. Why wouldn't that be a strong statement? Well, on Sunday, a day where he's with his family, the media goes crazy and says, well, you didn't specifically name the KKK. So he has someone come in from his staff, and he mentions it. He then mentions it on Monday. I'll speed up to it. So then he gets to his press conference on Tuesday, and he says both sides were at fault. Weren't both sides at fault? Of course, they had the other side.
Well, is it fair to equate? Well,
he didn't equate. He did not equate. And that's what the media wants you to say. He said they were equal.
Yeah, and of course I'm not saying he did, but that some in the media and a lot of folks that you know, this is a very heavy issue for a lot of people, and they look at the situation down there in Charlottesville, and they didn't necessarily see that two sides are at fault, right? Some folks look at that and see a bunch of white supremacists and KKK members, you know, in their town circle. And these residents now they absolutely did not want these people in their hometown, right? And it wasn't.
So then the alt left or the Antifa, whoever you want to say was there, that came in with the bats and
they were there too, yeah. But there are also hundreds of local citizens of Charlottesville that just didn't want white nationalists and white supremacists in their backyard.
That's great, and those people probably weren't at fault. But the people that came with the masks, the bats, how about the flamethrower? You know, the famous picture, the guy trying to burn 3 people with the flamethrower? That guy was on the left side.
We also had someone shooting a gun at that individual, right? We had people
they were both
shooting
at fault.
weapons.
Just what President Trump said, they're both at fault. And he didn't say equally at fault. And that's where I think
okay, so you would agree. Okay, so in your opinion, he wasn't saying equally at fault. He was just saying there were troublemakers on multiple sides there.
Sure.
I don't even like the idea of both sides, right? Like you have pointed out, it wasn't just Antifa and the KKK. And I think you're right. The media is trying to make it into that. But yeah, we were actually in Charlottesville all day. That's why I'm definitely. Getting in on this issue a little bit.
That's the thing, is if you say they're equally at fault, then the people that started the protest and came with prepared to fight are being equated with the other ones that weren't. But that's not what President Trump said. They're both at fault, and he said there were good people on both sides, and they blew that one out of proportion. You just stated it. You said there were a lot of people there that were just there to protest, that they didn't want a statue with somebody they revered taken
Well, these
down.
weren't exactly history buffs, right, in the park that were worried about.
Well, most of them weren't, but I bet you there were some that were. And first of all, I don't know all of them that were there. I would assume President Trump has a better understanding if there were some there that really, look at, the statue, Lee,
Robert E. Lee, General Lee,
Robert E. Lee is revered in much of the South. And quite honestly, my mother, who was has a doctorate and she's been a teacher, she thinks Robert E. Lee has an incredible background, and there's a lot of things that he did that were positive, and he shouldn't be blamed for the Civil War. And she's a Democrat. So, you know, a lot of people just said, hey, when you're taking down a statue to somebody that's a large part of our history. That's not for us to decide in Nevada. That's for the people to decide in Charlottesville. And that's where it should have been, that discussion should have happened.
We spent a lot of time on that issue, but I guess my question to you here to wrap things up, what are the top 3 issues for Nevadans heading into 18? And you know, I think immigration might be one of those, and jobs are always at the top of the list. But I guess from your, you know, we want to hear from you. What do you think?
I don't believe immigration is the biggest issue, even though there's a large segment of Hispanic population there. It's the jobs, national security, and quite honestly, I think the government spending. Everywhere I go, at least, people are worried about $20 trillion in debt. Just keeps going up. President Trump has tried to start taking down the size of government. He's reduced the size, or he's proposed a reduction in the size of many of these agencies, to the consternation of the Democrats. So you look at building the economy up, and he's done that with eliminating burdensome regulations. He wants to, he has a good repeal of the tax code and putting in a more updated, fair one. That's going to help build the economy. National security, you see that he's taken a much tougher stance than President Obama did in showing the force of the U.S. military, and that we're not going to stand back and appease everybody like President Obama did. And then you look at the government spending, and he hasn't got there yet, but he needs help from Congress to get that done. But I like what he's talking about. Those are America First principles that I believe in.
Great. And then one final question here. You know, you were a multi-sport athlete in high school, named the Nevada MVP, most valuable player of the year for the state of Nevada. And then, of course, Las Vegas is getting the Oakland Raiders. Do you have an allegiance to an NFL team? Will you be shifting that to the Raiders? What are we thinking here?
I hadn't had allegiance. Because my father was a coach, I always rooted for teams that I had a coach I liked or players I liked.
Okay.
Well, Raiders coming in Las Vegas, we're going to be Raider fans.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, great. Well, thanks for joining us. Hope you learned a little bit more about Danny Tarkanian, who is taking on Senator Dean Heller in the Republican primary in the state of Nevada. Stay tuned with the Daily Caller for that race and all other elections coming up in 2018. Thanks for joining us. Danny, thanks for coming in and talking to us for a few minutes.
Thanks for having me on.